The silence ended before the first shot was fired. It wasn't the comforting silence of peace, nor the fearful stillness before an ambush. It was something heavier, a silence that stretched across millions of kilometers of empty space, where entire fleets drifted without a single engine flare disturbing the darkness. The Keeler Expanse, a graveyard of shattered moons and dying stars, had witnessed countless wars over the last 10,000 years. Yet never, not once, had it witnessed every weapon lowered while every eye turned toward a single accusation. Thousands of warships hung motionless in perfect formation, their hulls reflecting the cold light of a crimson giant star that seemed to bleed across the void. Ion cannons remained fully charged. Missile bays stood open. Shield generators hummed beneath armored plating. Every captain waited with fingers hovering over firing commands that could erase civilizations in seconds. But no one moved. Because somewhere above the battlefield, invisible communication arrays carried a message powerful enough to stop a war before it truly began. A voice echoed through every bridge, every command center, every military outpost connected to the Galactic Concord's quantum network. It carried no anger. No excitement. Only the chilling certainty of absolute authority. By unanimous decree of the High Tribunal, the species known as humanity stands accused of violating the sacred combat protocols. The words rippled across thousands of translation systems, spoken instantly in millions of languages. On distant colony worlds, civilians gathered around holographic broadcasts. In orbital stations, merchants abandoned negotiations. Even prison moons suspended executions as guards and prisoners alike stared toward glowing projection screens. Across the galaxy, history had paused to witness what many already believed would become humanity's final judgment. The accusation alone was enough to freeze entire governments. The sacred combat protocols were older than most civilizations still alive. They had survived empires, revolutions, and extinction events. Every starfaring species had sworn to obey them without exception. Wars could be fought. Planets could be conquered. Fleets could be destroyed. But the protocols were untouchable. They were treated less like laws and more like the laws of physics themselves. Breaking them meant becoming something beyond an enemy. It meant becoming an outlaw to the entire galaxy. At the center of the vast armada floated a single Terran cruiser. Its hull was scarred by plasma burns and stitched together with emergency repair plates that still glowed faintly from recent welding drones. One engine sputtered with unstable blue light. Several weapon ports remained blackened from overheating. Compared to the elegant alien dreadnoughts surrounding it, the human vessel looked exhausted, battered, almost insignificant. Yet every targeting system in the expanse remained locked on that one ship. Inside its bridge, warning lights pulsed across steel walls worn smooth by years of combat. The recycled air smelled faintly of burnt circuitry, hydraulic fluid, and stale coffee. Officers stood at silent attention, pretending to study tactical displays while stealing nervous glances toward their captain. No one spoke. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the humming reactor beneath their feet. They all understood what this moment meant. One wrong word would ignite a battle that no historian would ever finish recording. Captain Elias Ward stood before the panoramic observation window with his hands calmly folded behind his back. Beyond the glass floated an ocean of enemy warships, enough firepower to reduce Earth's greatest cities to drifting ash. His reflection stared back at him between the stars, older than his years, eyes marked by countless sleepless nights, his uniform carrying fresh burns from a battle fought only hours earlier. He could feel thousands of alien commanders waiting for fear, for panic, for surrender. Instead, he smiled. Not the smile of a desperate man. Not the smile of someone who had accepted defeat. It was the quiet, dangerous smile of someone who already knew that everyone else in the room had misunderstood the game they were playing. For more than 4 centuries, the Galactic Concord had done what no empire, alliance, or religion had ever accomplished before: it had civilized war. Across thousands of inhabited systems, conflict was no longer chaos but ritual. Every battle began with a formal declaration transmitted through quantum relays. Engagement zones were mapped in advance. Medical vessels drifted untouched between opposing fleets, marked by brilliant blue beacons visible from millions of kilometers away. Retreat corridors were respected. Civilian infrastructure was declared sacred. Even the timing of offensives was governed by synchronized stellar cycles, ensuring that no commander gained advantage through surprise alone. To most species, these customs were more than laws. They were proof that the galaxy had evolved beyond the barbaric ages that had once burned entire civilizations into cosmic dust. Ancient archives spoke of the first extinction wars, when stars themselves had been detonated as weapons and entire species vanished without leaving behind a single transmission. Those nightmares had given birth to the sacred combat protocols. Since then, every civilization entering the Concord accepted them without question. Honor had become the foundation of survival. Humanity had signed those agreements. But humanity had never worshipped them. Captain Elias Ward understood that difference better than anyone standing on the bridge of the TCS Resolute. As he watched the immense alien armadas surrounding his scarred cruiser, memories surfaced uninvited, not of space battles, but of history lessons from Earth. He remembered studying ancient generals who had crossed frozen mountains no one believed passable, commanders who had hidden armies inside forests, resistance fighters who had turned ordinary cities into impossible fortresses. Humanity's greatest victories had rarely come from fighting fair. They had come from adapting faster than the enemy could predict. Rules, Ward had learned long ago, were valuable, until someone used them as chains. His mission had seemed almost routine when High Command first transmitted the orders. Escort relief convoys to New Horizon. Reinforce colonial defenses. Maintain peace along the frontier. Simple words. Simple objectives. But space had a cruel habit of turning simple missions into legends. New Horizon floated near the edge of explored territory, orbiting a pale blue dwarf star whose fading light barely reached the frozen mining colonies below. Towering extraction platforms pierced fields of glittering crystal that stretched across entire continents, harvesting exotic elements found nowhere else in known space. Massive orbital refineries glowed like artificial suns above the planet, while cargo elevators climbed endlessly between surface and sky. Nearly 2 million civilians called the colony home, engineers, miners, researchers, children who had never seen Earth's oceans except through archived recordings. To them, New Horizon wasn't an outpost. It was home. Unfortunately, it was also surrounded. Long-range scanners had first detected the approaching armada weeks before visual confirmation. At first, analysts believed the readings were sensor ghosts caused by unstable radiation belts. Then the contacts multiplied. Hundreds became thousands. What emerged from hyperspace dwarfed every defensive estimate the Concord had ever prepared for the frontier. The invading empire had arrived with enough warships to darken orbital space itself. Ward's task force consisted of only 38 combat vessels. The enemy possessed more than 800. Even the most optimistic tactical simulations offered less than a 2% chance of survival. Several predicted total annihilation before civilian evacuations could even begin. Officers aboard the Resolute had studied those numbers in silence, each pretending confidence while privately calculating how long their reactors could continue firing before overload. Yet no one requested reassignment. No one questioned the mission. Because every Terran sailor aboard those ships knew something the algorithms never could. Humanity had spent thousands of years surviving impossible odds long before it ever reached the stars. And somewhere beyond the frozen rings of New Horizon, the first move of a war that would shake the galaxy had already begun. The evidence arrived like a sentence already written. One by one, towering holographic displays illuminated the tribunal chamber and every command bridge connected to the Galactic Concord. Crystal-clear recordings played without interruption, each clip more damning than the last. Human strike craft emerged from the shadows of shattered asteroids to destroy enemy supply convoys that had been officially designated as protected logistics vessels. Electronic warfare teams infiltrated encrypted military networks, blinding entire fleets moments before battle. Cargo freighters bearing civilian transponder codes suddenly unfolded hidden weapon arrays, releasing clouds of autonomous attack drones into unsuspecting formations. Another recording showed Terran destroyers vanishing behind the violent gravity distortions of unstable pulsars before reappearing deep inside enemy territory to strike command stations from impossible angles. Gasps echoed through the tribunal. To nearly every civilization watching, the verdict seemed obvious. Humanity had ignored every sacred rule that governed civilized warfare. Condemnation spread faster than light. Ambassadors who had once defended Earth's admission into the Concord now stood in uneasy silence, refusing even to meet one another's eyes. Military alliances that had depended on Terran support quietly suspended communications, fearful that association alone might bring sanctions upon their own worlds. Across countless systems, news networks replayed the footage under grim headlines. Earth breaks the sacred protocols, the Terran betrayal, has humanity returned to barbarism, public opinion shifted with terrifying speed. Citizens who had celebrated human courage only weeks before now questioned whether Earth had always concealed a darker nature beneath its diplomacy. Inside the battered cruiser Resolute, no one bothered watching the broadcasts anymore. Lieutenant Mara Chen stood beside the tactical console, fists clenched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She listened to alien commentators describe humanity as dishonorable, reckless, dangerous to galactic stability. Each accusation landed like another blow. Not because they were convincing, but because they erased everything she had witnessed with her own eyes. She remembered the first emergency distress call from New Horizon. Families screaming as orbital evacuation corridors exploded into burning debris. Medical transports vaporized while broadcasting internationally recognized rescue frequencies. Children trapped beneath collapsing habitat domes as enemy bombardments continued without pause. None of those images appeared in the tribunal recordings. Only humanity's response. Captain Elias Ward remained motionless near the bridge viewport, staring into the endless darkness beyond the fleet. He said nothing. His silence unsettled the crew far more than anger ever could. Every officer aboard knew the truth. They had followed every regulation until the moment those regulations became death sentences. They had requested ceasefire verification when civilian convoys disappeared. They had transmitted diplomatic protests after hospitals were targeted. They had appealed to the Concord for intervention while entire mining districts burned beneath orbital fire. Each request vanished into bureaucratic delay while the invasion advanced another 1,000 kilometers. Then the choice had become painfully simple. Obey the rules. Or save the people. Ward could still hear the voice of the young colony governor during that final transmission. The signal had been distorted by interference and collapsing communications satellites, but the desperation had cut through every burst of static. Captain, they're not following the protocols anymore. If you keep waiting, there won't be anyone left to protect. That single sentence had changed everything. Humanity hadn't abandoned honor. Humanity had abandoned illusion. As the tribunal demanded explanations and alien commanders denounced Earth's conduct, an uncomfortable truth lingered beneath every accusation, a truth no one wanted to confront. Every so-called violation committed by the Terran fleet had occurred only after the invading empire had shattered the very rules it now claimed humanity had broken. The protected supply depots carried hidden munitions. The civilian evacuation lanes had become carefully prepared kill zones. Peace declarations had masked fleet movements timed for surprise assaults. The protocols had not failed because humans ignored them. They had failed because someone else had learned to weaponize them. And as outrage consumed the galaxy, Captain Ward knew the most dangerous battle was no longer unfolding among the stars. It was unfolding inside the minds of those who still believed the enemy deserved the benefit of the doubt. The tribunal chamber fell into a silence so complete that even the hum of quantum projectors seemed unnaturally loud. Every delegate waited for Captain Elias Ward to defend humanity, to deny the accusations, or perhaps to beg for mercy before the combined military power of the Galactic Concord. Instead, he made a single request. "Before judgment is passed," he said evenly, "I ask the tribunal to review one final piece of evidence." There was no emotion in his voice, no anger, no desperation. Only quiet confidence. For a brief moment, the High Arbiters exchanged uncertain glances. Then permission was granted. Across thousands of warships and billions of civilian receivers, every display shifted from the tribunal seal to a black screen carrying one simple label: unaltered archival recordings, authenticity verified. The darkness dissolved into light. What appeared was not another battle. It was history. Hidden sensor archives, buried beneath classified Concord databases for generations, unfolded one recording after another. Fleets from smaller civilizations could be seen dutifully announcing attacks according to the sacred combat protocols, only to discover enemy ambushes already waiting beyond designated engagement zones. Medical vessels marked with protected identification codes drifted into rescue corridors, where concealed weapons activated from supposedly neutral observation stations. Human analysts had uncovered something no investigator had bothered to search for. Every official battle log the invading empire had submitted over the last 3 centuries had been edited. Tiny fragments of data had been rewritten. Time stamps shifted by seconds. Navigation records altered by fractions of a degree. Individually, the changes appeared meaningless. Together, they transformed acts of calculated betrayal into perfect compliance with galactic law. The chamber erupted. Delegates stood from their seats in disbelief as forensic algorithms independently confirmed every file's authenticity. Entire walls filled with streams of verification codes turning green one after another. Historians frantically searched ancient archives. Military scholars replayed forgotten campaigns that suddenly made horrifying sense. Civilizations once believed to have fallen because of poor leadership had, in reality, been carefully manipulated into predictable defeat. They had obeyed the protocols while their enemies quietly rewrote the battlefield around them. Honor had never protected them. It had trapped them. Captain Ward remained perfectly still as the realization spread through the galaxy like a shockwave. He remembered the long nights aboard the Resolute, when intelligence officers refused to accept impossible casualty reports. They had noticed tiny inconsistencies no artificial intelligence considered significant. Convoys arriving before departure times. Sensor ghosts repeating identical movement patterns decades apart. Emergency beacons transmitting with mathematically perfect timing. Humanity's investigators had approached the mystery the way they approached everything else, not by trusting the system, but by questioning it. They had discovered that the sacred combat protocols were never truly broken by the invaders. They had been rewritten. Quietly. Patiently. Generation after generation. The Empire's greatest weapon had never been its immense fleets, its devastating plasma cannons, or its armies stretching across thousands of worlds. Its greatest weapon was belief. It had convinced the entire galaxy that obedience and morality were the same thing. It had trained civilizations to become predictable. To announce every move. To fight within invisible walls designed by the very enemy they feared. Any species that followed the rules became easier to defeat. Any commander who questioned them became an outlaw before the battle even began. It was the perfect prison because no one realized the door had always been unlocked. A murmur spread through the tribunal as ancient certainty began collapsing under the weight of undeniable truth. Captain Ward slowly stepped toward the center of the chamber. The reflection of countless stars shimmered across the polished floor beneath his boots. Alien admirals stared at him with expressions no longer filled with outrage, but uncertainty. Some looked ashamed. Others looked afraid. Because if humanity had uncovered this deception, what else had they discovered? Ward allowed himself the smallest smile. You called them sacred combat protocols, he said, his calm voice carrying effortlessly across the silent chamber. We called them your playbook. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy understood that the most dangerous species in existence was not the one that ignored the rules. It was the one that learned who had written them. The moment Captain Ward's final words faded into silence, the battlefield changed forever. Across the Keeler expanse, thousands of alien commanders were still struggling to process the revelation that had shattered centuries of unquestioned belief. Their command structures hesitated. Orders were delayed. Tactical networks flooded with contradictory instructions as admirals argued over whether to continue the engagement or await new directives from the tribunal. That single heartbeat of uncertainty was all humanity had been waiting for. Execute Operation Wildfire. Ward's command traveled through encrypted quantum channels invisible to every foreign sensor in the system. For weeks, perhaps even months, fragments of the operation had been quietly assembled beneath the enemy's notice. Nothing about it appeared extraordinary when viewed individually. Broken satellites drifting through debris fields. Derelict cargo haulers abandoned after earlier battles. Automated mining stations operating on reduced power. Salvage drones collecting wreckage from destroyed ships. To the invaders, they were little more than background noise, the forgotten scars of a frontier war. They were about to become an army. Without warning, thousands of inactive wrecks came alive. Hidden reactor cores ignited beneath twisted hulls. Panels that had appeared melted beyond repair suddenly unfolded with mechanical precision, revealing racks of autonomous strike drones packed inside abandoned vessels. Mining platforms rotated away from nearby asteroid belts, exposing gravitational beam emitters powerful enough to redirect entire cruisers from their attack vectors. Civilian cargo freighters split open along invisible seams, transforming into heavily armed missile carriers whose launch systems had been disguised beneath ordinary shipping containers. Even the frozen orbital refineries above New Horizon altered configuration, extending kilometer-long energy-focusing arrays originally built for mineral extraction. Under human engineering, every peaceful machine had quietly become something else. Not a weapon. An advantage. Enemy sensors exploded with impossible readings. Admirals shouted over one another as tactical displays filled with new contacts appearing from directions that moments earlier had been completely empty. Artificial intelligence systems attempted to predict Terran movements, only to fail as each calculation became obsolete before it finished processing. Human fleets refused to advance in recognizable formations. Fighters deliberately broke established doctrines, sacrificing perfect efficiency for complete unpredictability. Some squadrons retreated only to lure pursuing battleships directly into dense asteroid clusters rigged with dormant explosives. Others disappeared behind unstable pulsars where no military algorithm considered navigation survivable, only to emerge behind command carriers minutes later. There was no elegant strategy to decode. There was only adaptation. Captain Ward watched the chaos unfold through the Resolute's panoramic bridge window. Around him, officers moved with absolute focus, yet none required lengthy instructions. Humanity had trained for moments exactly like this, not because they expected victory through superior firepower, but because they understood something older than spaceflight itself. Every battle eventually abandoned the plans drawn before it began. Survival belonged to those capable of changing faster than fear. Lieutenant Marachan smiled as telemetry flooded across her console. They're trying to predict us, Captain. Ward never looked away from the stars. They can't. Beyond the bridge, the impossible continued. Autonomous drones sacrificed themselves to expose shield frequencies. Engineering crews rerouted power through civilian infrastructure to reinforce planetary defenses seconds before orbital bombardment struck. Emergency construction swarms assembled replacement weapon platforms while the battle still raged overhead. Human medics stabilized wounded soldiers inside corridors shaking from nearby impacts, refusing to abandon their posts despite decompression alarms screaming throughout the ship. Every person, every machine, every system became another piece of an ever-changing puzzle the enemy could never solve. The invading empire had prepared to defeat a stronger fleet. Instead, it faced an idea. One no amount of firepower could destroy. As its perfect battle lines fractured into isolated pockets of confusion, commanders who had spent entire careers mastering the sacred combat protocols found themselves confronting an opponent that treated every obstacle as raw material for innovation. Their confidence collapsed long before their ships did. One by one, engines failed, formations dissolved, and surrender signals began appearing across the darkness. Humanity had not won because it possessed larger weapons. It had won because when the universe changed, humanity changed with it. And in that terrifying truth, every civilization watching finally understood why Earth's smile had been the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield. The war ended not with another explosion, but with a signature. Weeks after the Battle of the Keeler Expanse, the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concord stood filled with representatives from nearly every known civilization. Towering crystalline delegates shimmered beneath vaulted ceilings of living glass. Massive aquatic beings floated inside suspended gravity chambers, their voices resonating through the water like distant whale songs. Mechanical collectives projected themselves as shifting lattices of light, while insectoid queens sat surrounded by silent honor guards whose armor still carried fresh scars from the frontier campaign. It was a gathering unlike any in recorded history. The old banners still hung from the chamber walls, but their meaning had changed forever. Before the eyes of the galaxy, the sacred combat protocols, once considered untouchable for over 4 centuries, were formally dissolved. In their place rose a new charter built on a painful lesson history had almost buried: peace cannot survive if justice depends on lies, and rules are worthless when they protect the guilty more than the innocent. No celebration followed. Victory carried too many names carved into memorial walls. On New Horizon, reconstruction had already begun. The colony no longer echoed with the relentless roar of orbital bombardments. Instead, the sounds of welding drones, construction mechs, and children's laughter slowly reclaimed the frozen valleys. Habitat domes shattered during the invasion stood wrapped in glowing repair scaffolds. Engineers worked day and night beneath skies illuminated by graceful streams of cargo shuttles delivering supplies from dozens of allied worlds. Species that had once doubted humanity now volunteered side by side with Terran crews, rebuilding homes they had never lived in for neighbors they had never met. Former enemies even joined the effort, ashamed of the deception that had manipulated them for generations. Above the planet, the once devastated orbital stations shone like newborn stars, their fractured hulls replaced with brighter alloys that reflected the pale light of the blue dwarf sun. Captain Elias Ward walked quietly through one of the restored colony streets without ceremony or escort. Most civilians never recognized him. To them, he was simply another weary officer helping unload medical crates or repair damaged communication towers. He preferred it that way. As he watched children race across freshly laid pathways, laughing beneath transparent dome ceilings that revealed endless stars overhead, memories of the battle drifted through his mind. He remembered the desperate distress calls. The impossible decisions. The faces of crew members who had volunteered for missions knowing they would never return. Every rebuilt wall stood because someone else had chosen not to come home. Victory had never erased that cost. It simply made the sacrifice meaningful. Across the galaxy, military academies rewrote centuries of doctrine. Young officers no longer memorized rigid battle rituals as unquestionable truths. Instead, they studied ethics alongside strategy, learning that courage was not measured by blind obedience but by the willingness to challenge broken systems before they destroyed innocent lives. Historians reopened forgotten archives. Entire civilizations rediscovered ancestors who had been falsely blamed for defeats engineered through deception. Humanity had not merely exposed a conspiracy. It had restored stolen honor to worlds that had carried undeserved shame for generations. The ripple spread farther than any fleet ever could. Days later, the Resolute departed New Horizon under quiet starlight. Its battered hull still bore the scars of the campaign, but no one rushed to polish them away. They had become reminders rather than imperfections. Standing once more before the bridge's panoramic viewport, Ward gazed into the vast darkness stretching beyond the borders of explored space. Navigation charts ended there. Beyond them lay unmapped nebulae, silent galaxies, and mysteries older than memory itself. Somewhere out there, civilizations untouched by the Concord were certainly watching. Some would come in peace. Others would not. History had taught him one unchanging truth. The universe never stayed quiet for long. Behind him, the bridge crew prepared for departure with calm professionalism. Engines awakened beneath the deck, vibrating through the steel like the steady heartbeat of a living giant. Stars slowly elongated into rivers of light as the ship aligned for faster-than-light transit. Before the jump, Ward allowed himself one final glance at the rebuilt colony glowing peacefully against the frozen horizon. A faint smile crossed his face. Not because every battle had been won, but because humanity had remembered who it was. Not the strongest. Not the oldest. Not the most advanced. Only the species that refused to surrender its future to fear, and refused to let hope become another forgotten rule written in someone else's book. Then the Resolute vanished into the stars, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed, and carrying humanity toward whatever waited next in the endless dark.